Most people are afraid of silence. We live in a world where noise has become the comfort zone. Distractions have become the drug. We fill our lives with television, notifications, conversations that lead nowhere, and relationships that only serve to numb the pain of being alone. But silence, that quiet space, that stillness that comes when there's no one calling, no one texting, and no applause echoing back at us, that scares people. But let me tell you something, strength is born in that silence. When everything gets quiet, when the crowd stops cheering and the voices go mute, that's when your inner voice finally has room to rise. That's when the whispers of your spirit become clearer. That's when you start hearing what God has been trying to say all along, but he couldn't get through the noise. See, some of the most powerful moments in your life won't be loud. They won't be shared. They won't be posted. They'll happen in the silence, in those raw and unfiltered moments when you're sitting with your own thoughts, your own pain, your own truth. That's where the breakthrough begins. You don't really know who you are until you're forced to sit with yourself. You don't know the depth of your own strength until silence stretches longer than you're comfortable with. It's in that place when you can't run, can't hide, can't scroll, can't call that you begin to face the real you. And it might be scary, it might be messy, but that's where the work gets done. That's where you stop pretending. That's where masks fall off and healing begins. We often confuse silence with punishment. We think, why am I alone? Why isn't anybody calling? Why do I feel so isolated? But sometimes silence is not punishment, it's preparation. It's a reset. It's the season where the soil gets broken so something new can be planted. You can't grow fruit in noise. You can't build deep roots on a shaky foundation of constant distraction. That silence is the universe's way of slowing you down just enough so you can finally start building something that lasts. You weren't made to run from the quiet, you were made to be refined by it. Because when everything else is stripped away, when there's no one left to impress, that's when you tap into your real power. That's when you learn how to encourage yourself. That's when you learn how to clap for yourself. That's when you look in the mirror and say, I may not have it all together, but I'm still standing. That's power, that's strength. And that only comes when you stop fearing silence and start embracing what it teaches. Some of you are in a season right now where you feel like the phone has stopped ringing. The invites have stopped coming. You're scrolling through life wondering, did everybody forget about me? But maybe, just maybe, you weren't forgotten, you were set apart. Maybe this is the season where God is silencing the world so he can amplify his voice. So he can give you vision, so he can pour into you without interference. Because what he's doing in you requires privacy. You don't train champions in the spotlight, you train them in silence. And when the silence has done its work, when it has carved away the clutter, when it has sharpened your spirit and reminded you of who you are, that's when you'll walk out of that season stronger than ever. Not because someone pulled you out, but because you learned how to rise in the quiet. You learned how to grow without needing noise. You learned how to huddle alone, and that made you unshakable. So if you're in a silent season, if you're walking through a time where you feel like you've been placed on pause, don't rush through it. Don't curse the quiet. Don't try to escape the solitude. Lean into it. Let it shape you. Let it show you what the noise was covering up. Because there is power in silence, and the moment you stop fearing it, you start owning it. You may feel like you're alone, but you're not empty. You're being filled. You're being strengthened. You're being rebuilt in a way that only solitude could accomplish. And when it's all said and done, when you walk out of that silence, you won't just be louder, you'll be stronger. That's where the transformation begins. In the silence, you know what's interesting? We spend so much of our lives searching for validation, searching for people to approve, to clap, to say, yes, you're doing it right. We look to others for our worth as if they hold the key to who we are. And when we don't get that validation, when people walk away or don't acknowledge us, we start questioning our value. But let me tell you, being alone isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a revelation of your strength. There's something powerful about standing alone. Not because you want to, but because you have to. There's strength that shows up when the people you thought would be there disappear. There's growth that happens when you stop chasing approval and start embracing authenticity. That's when you begin to learn something crucial. Not everyone is meant to go where you're going. You see, elevation comes with separation. And sometimes that separation is painful, but it's also necessary. You can't grow into the next version of yourself if you're dragging people who only knew the old version. You can't step into purpose while trying to hold on to company that was only meant for the previous chapter. Some of those connections weren't meant to last, they were seasonal. And the longer you hold on to them, the more they weigh you down. There comes a moment in every person's journey when they have to decide, am I going to stay here comfortable with the familiar, or am I going to walk forward, even if it means walking alone? That decision is what separates the dreamers from the doers, the comfortable from the courageous. It's easy to walk when people are cheering for you, but can you keep walking when there's silence? When there's nobody texting, nobody reposting, nobody calling your name? Can you keep showing up when you feel unseen? That's the test. And it's not a punishment, it's a process. Because in that space of being alone, you start realizing you're more capable than you thought. You learn to depend on yourself. You discover the strength that's been lying dormant because you were too busy leaning on everybody else. When you stop seeking validation, you start walking in revelation. You don't need to be seen to be significant. You don't need applause to have purpose. People will doubt you. They'll misunderstand you. They'll say you've changed, and you have. Growth will do that. Isolation will do that. That time alone will reshape your thinking, refine your focus, and reignite your drive. You'll stop settling for average conversations and surface level connections. You'll start demanding more from life, from yourself, from the future you're building. Because being alone forces you to think, to reflect, to ask yourself, what do I really want? Not what your friends expect, not what society says you should do, but what you truly want. And when you get clear on that, when you start moving in alignment with your purpose, you'll find that peace becomes louder than popularity. And that right there is a shift most people never make. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. Let them walk away if they must. Your growth doesn't need their permission. Your purpose isn't up for debate. You don't need a crowd to make an impact. You don't need an entourage to make progress. All you need is clarity, consistency, and the courage to keep going. The beauty of being alone is that it strips away the noise, the expectations, the pressure to be what everyone else wants. It creates space for truth, space for growth, space for vision. And in that space you evolve. You stop living a life based on approval and you start building a life based on authenticity. That's when everything changes. So don't fear the silence. Don't run from the loneliness. Don't think that just because you're walking alone, you're walking wrong. No, sometimes that's the exact path you need to be on. Because it's in the solitude where the warrior is built, where the leader is shaped, where the fire is lit. You're not alone because you're not enough. You're alone because you're becoming more. And when you finally look back at this season, when you see how far you've come, you'll realize it wasn't loneliness. It was preparation. It wasn't rejection. It was redirection. It wasn't silence. It was strategy. Your breakthrough doesn't need company, it just needs commitment. When you're walking through a season of being alone, one of the hardest things to deal with is the weight of silence. The stillness can feel loud, it can feel heavy. But here's what I want you to hear today: just because it's quiet doesn't mean nothing's happening. See, some of the most powerful growth happens in silence. Some of the most necessary transformation takes place when nobody's watching, when nobody's clapping, and when it feels like you've been forgotten. But that silence, that's not emptiness, it's space being made for something greater. There's a reason seeds grow underground. They don't blossom in the sunlight right away. They don't bloom in public before they break in private. That process of breaking or being buried alone is what sets the stage for growth. But if you know how to be still, if you don't learn how to be content in the quiet, you'll mistake your process for punishment. You'll call it failure when it's actually formation. We live in a world that rewards noise. The loudest voice often gets the most attention, the most followers, the most applause. But I've learned that noise doesn't equal impact. Noise doesn't always mean progress. And sometimes when you step back from it all, when you get alone with yourself, you start to realize how much of your life was being dictated by distraction. It's only in solitude that you begin to hear what really matters: the truth, the direction, the next step. That's why some people avoid being alone, because they don't want to face what silence reveals. They don't want to hear their own doubts, their own fears, their own truth. But if you want to grow, if you want to grow and truly become the person you were created to be, you've got to go through that phase. You've got to sit with it. You've got to let the silence speak. In that stillness, clarity begins to rise. Vision sharpens, priorities shift. You start realizing what matters and what doesn't. You stop trying to impress people who aren't even paying attention. You stop chasing what's flashy and start focusing on what's fulfilling. It's a sacred space, that season of silence, because it teaches you what noise never could: self-trust, discipline, and purpose. And I know it's not easy, it's uncomfortable. We're used to being surrounded by people, notifications, feedback. We crave connection. But don't confuse connection with confirmation. Just because someone is in your life doesn't mean they support your calling. Just because you're not surrounded doesn't mean you're not supported. Some of your greatest support will come from within, from your faith, your discipline, your belief. It's during those quiet seasons that you find out what you're made of. You learn how to keep showing up even when no one sees. You learn to encourage yourself when no one's clapping. You learn to keep walking when the path isn't clear. And that kind of strength, that kind of resilience, you don't get it when everything's easy. You earn that in the stillness. That's where the true warriors are born, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not on the stage, but in the struggle. It's in the silence where the preparation takes place. That's where your spirit gets fortified. That's where your mind gets sharpened. That's where your identity gets strengthened, not by what others say, but by what you come to know deep inside. When you start embracing the silence, you stop fearing solitude. You start seeing it as necessary, not negative. You begin to understand that being alone isn't the problem, it's part of the process. It's where purpose is built. Because when you've been through seasons of silence, when you've survived moments where it was just you and your faith, you come out on the other side unshakable. You don't need people to validate you. You don't need applause to move. You don't need company to keep climbing. So if you're in that place right now, if you're walking through the quiet, I want you to stop and breathe. Don't rush out of it. Don't panic. Don't run to fill the space with noise or people who don't belong. Stay in it. Learn from it. Let the silence refine you, not define you. Because what feels like a pause is really preparation. What feels like loneliness is often the launch pad. And what looks like a setback is really just the setup. Sometimes the silence is exactly what you need. As she sat, watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. You know, one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life is that you can't take everyone with you. Not everyone is meant to walk every part of your journey. And sometimes the very thing that's holding you back from becoming who you were created to be is who you're trying to hold on to. That's a hard truth. It's not something most people want to hear, but it's something we all eventually have to face. Growth comes with a cost. And one of the costs of growth is relationships that no longer align with where you're headed. See, when you start elevating, when you start healing, when you're evolving, becoming more aware of your purpose, don't be surprised when certain people start falling away. It's not always because they're bad people. It's not always because they're toxic. Sometimes it's just because they're tied to a version of you that no longer exists. They were connected to the you who didn't know your worth, the you who doubted your own power, the you who stayed quiet, small, or settled. And when you stop being that person, the dynamic shifts. And what happens then? You start feeling guilty. You start questioning yourself. You wonder, maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I should just keep the peace. Maybe I should go back to the old version of me just to make them comfortable. But that's not growth. That's regression. And you can't shrink yourself to keep people who were never meant to grow with you. I know it hurts. Letting go always does. Especially when you walk with people through storms, shared dreams, build history. But history isn't the same as destiny. Just because someone's been with you doesn't mean they're meant to go with you. And if you keep dragging people who are no longer aligned with your purpose, you'll delay your progress, you'll drain your energy, and you'll doubt your own direction. Sometimes you've got to make peace with the fact that growth creates distance. And that distance isn't a punishment, it's a sign of progress. You're not abandoning people. You're choosing alignment. You're choosing peace. You're choosing the path that was laid out for you. And anyone who truly loves you, anyone who respects your growth, they won't ask you to go back to who you used to be just to keep them close. That's why solitude is so powerful. It teaches you who's really for you and who's just familiar. It teaches you that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. It means being selective. You start realizing that not everyone deserves access to your energy. your space, your spirit. And when you finally stop begging for support, when you stop forcing connections that don't fit, you begin to attract what aligns. But you've got to be brave enough to make that break, to say, I love you, but I can't stay stuck here with you. That takes courage. That takes maturity. And that takes faith that what's ahead of you is greater than what you're leaving behind. Faith that the void you feel now will be filled with something better, something stronger, something real. So if you're feeling isolated in your growth, I want you to understand you're not being punished. You're being prepared. Every person who walked away, every friendship that faded, every connection that collapsed was making room for something new. And I promise you, the people who are meant to be part of your destiny will not be intimidated by your growth. They'll celebrate it. They'll water it. They'll grow with you, not pull you back. Don't let fear keep you tethered to what's no longer serving you. You were created for more. You've come too far to go back now. Release what's holding you. Trust what's calling you. And walk boldly into the next chapter of your life. Because sometimes in order to rise, you've got to release that. Sometimes when life isolates you, when the phone stops ringing, when the people you thought would always be there start to fade into the background, you begin to think something's wrong with you. You wonder why they left, why they stopped checking in, why you're sitting in silence when you used to be surrounded by noise, by laughter, by companionship. But let me tell you something that took me years to understand. That silence is not your enemy. That isolation is not punishment. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's preparation. It's in the silence where God starts to deal with you, where He removes the distractions so you can finally hear what He's been trying to tell you all along. You see, there's a version of you that can only be birthed in isolation. There's a strength, a clarity that comes from being alone and learning to be okay with yourself by yourself. It's easy to be confident when you're surrounded by applause. It's easy to feel worthy when you're constantly affirmed by others. But what happens when it's just you? No validation, no cheerleaders, no audience. That's where the real work begins. That's where you discover whether your confidence is rooted in external noise or internal truth. Some of the most powerful growth happens in seasons where it feels like no one sees you, where it feels like you've been overlooked, forgotten, abandoned. But in that solitude, your foundation is being rebuilt. Your identity is being redefined. And your character is being refined not for the stage, not for the spotlight, but for the storm. Because storms are going to come. And when they do, you won't have time to run around looking for affirmation. You'll need to know who you are. You'll need to stand tall, even if you're standing alone. That's why God separates before He elevates. That's why He pulls you away from familiar voices before He speaks into your purpose. Because if you're still trying to please everybody, if you're still attached to expectations and people-pleasing patterns, you won't have the capacity to carry what He's calling you to. Some of you are asking for elevation, for blessings, for influence, but your character's still tied to approval. And approval addiction will suffocate your purpose every single time. Learn to be okay with not being understood. Learn to be okay with not being invited, not being applauded, not being seen. Because being unseen by man does not mean you're unnoticed by God. He sees you. He knows what He placed inside you. He knows the seeds growing in that quiet, hidden place. And when the time is right, He will reveal you. But don't rush it. Don't resent the season of obscurity. Don't curse the silence. Embrace it, sit with it, grow in it. It's in that quiet place where you start to trust your own voice, where you start to believe in your own value, where you stop seeking permission and start walking in purpose. Because let me tell you, when you come out of that season, when you built your strength in silence, when your identity is no longer fragile and dependent on who stays or who leaves, you become unshakable. And people will look at you and wonder, where did this confidence come from? But they won't understand the nights you cried yourself to sleep, the prayers you whispered when no one was watching, the faith it took to keep going when everything that you said quit. So if you're in that place right now feeling isolated, feeling alone, don't be discouraged. Don't fight the season. Let it do its work in you. Let it prune what needs to be pruned. Let it build what needs to be built. Because when you come out on the other side, you won't need the crowd. You won't need the noise. You'll know who you are. You'll walk with a peace that doesn't need validation. There comes a point on the journey of becoming when you realize not everyone can go with you. And that's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone else. It's about recognizing that growth has a cost, and part of that cost is learning how to let go of what no longer serves where you're going. See, being alone isn't always about physical isolation. Sometimes it's about emotional and spiritual separation from people, places, and patterns that kept you small. And when you decide to rise, to evolve, to truly walk in your calling, something shifts, and not everyone can handle that shift. You start speaking different, thinking different. Your priorities change. Your energy changes. And suddenly some people who once celebrated you will start to distance themselves. Don't chase them. Don't shrink to fit back into places you outgrew. That's the test. That's the stretching. When God begins to move you from comfort to calling, from familiar to faith, you've got to be willing to walk away from what you once settled for, even if it hurts. We've been conditioned to believe that being alone is a weakness, that it means we're lacking something or something must be wrong with us. But the truth is, being alone can be one of the greatest gifts in your life if you learn how to use it. That quiet space gives you time to think, to heal, to realign with what really matters. You stop living for appearances and start living with authenticity. And when you live authentically, you won't attract crowds, you'll attract alignment. The people who show up for the real you, not the version of you you had to water down just to be accepted. Now, that transition isn't easy. Letting go of people you love, breaking cycles that were once comforting, it takes courage. It takes honesty. And it takes a level of self-respect that says, I deserve peace, even if it means walking alone. You stop asking, why didn't they stay? And start asking, why did I tolerate that for so long? Because truth be told, growth requires you to confront some hard realities about yourself too. Not just the people around you. Sometimes the hardest battle isn't walking away from them, it's walking away from the version of yourself that kept settling, that kept compromising, that kept waiting on someone else to validate your worth. There's strength in standing alone when the cost of company is your peace. And make no mistake, peace is expensive. It costs familiarity, it costs comfort, it costs comfort. But it gives you clarity, it gives you purpose, it gives you power. And that power, it doesn't come from applause. It doesn't come from being liked. It comes from knowing that you're walking in alignment with something greater than popularity. You're walking in purpose, so don't fear the letting go. Don't resent the release. Some people were only assigned to your past, not your future. They played their part and now the scene has shifted. It's not personal, it's purpose. Some doors have to close so you can walk through the one meant just for you. And yes, it's going to get lonely. Yes, you're going to question it. But on the other side of that loneliness is a level of strength you've never known before. You'll start to realize that the solitude was sacred. That in that space, your vision got clearer. Your voice got stronger. Your standards got higher. And most of all, your dependence shifted from them to Him. That's the real transformation. That's the kind of growth that doesn't just change your life, it changes your legacy. So if you're in a season of release, of separation, of walking away, walk boldly. Walk with peace. Walk with purpose. You're not losing people, you're finding yourself. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. The strength you build in solitude will carry you to the destiny that requires no permission to step into. And that kind of peace, that kind of strength, that can only be found in the silence. What you learn in the silence will carry you through the noise.